Welcome, dear listeners, to Broadcasts from Elsewhere. We talk about media that you may not hear about elsewhere. Today is the final day for November. This is our last bonus episode on the subject. Then we're moving on to some more Christmas-themed movies. Today, we're covering a 2001 Japanese film called The Happiness of the Katakuris. It's a horror musical comedy about a family that lives on a mountain, and they rent out their home as sort of an inn to their patrons. Basically, they run their own guest house, is what they call it in the movie. But anyways, it turns out a lot of their guests end up dead. So their solution to this is to bury them themselves, so as to not get bad publicity. This movie is a drug trip to begin with, honestly. And there's no beating around the bush with it either. As soon as the movie starts, it's already very surreal as far as the opening part of it. And there's several parts within that are also a little surreal here and there. It is great, though. It is great. I actually found out that it's actually based off of a different film from South Korea called The Quiet Family. It has pretty much the same premise. Family renting out their guest home and all that kind of stuff. Now, this movie is only in Japanese, also. I feel I should stress that. So that means that if you were to watch this, if you decide you want to watch it after this, or decide you want to watch it before this, you will have to read subtitles. If that's not for you, just stick around and I'll tell you all about it. But if you do want to check it out, it is of course on Tubi, like most of the things I've been reviewing, it seems like lately. But that might change soon here. But to check it out if you want to, it is pretty good. The only trigger warnings I can give you, I would say, would be there is some minor nudity. It's mostly just a few naked butts you'll see. There's a sex scene, if that bothers you. Some people are bothered by that. And, of course, there's also one trigger warning for a suicide, which will be one of the first deaths that I cover, so do be aware of that. Other than that, it's just mild blood. Not much else to worry about, I don't think. So, all that being said, I say we get into this acid trip of a movie. Spoilers ahead, of course. We start off by getting to see this very fancy restaurant, which isn't really ever we don't really come back to it ever in the movie again, but we do see some characters that appear later. There's this group of 4 holy people, I guess you can call them that, who are doing like a spiritual journey thing. And they stop into this restaurant and we meet them again later, but they're still not super important, but that's the only reason I can think of why this place matters at all. We close in on this one woman who just ordered some soup, right? And at first I thought she was just struggling to eat her soup because she's like trying really hard with her spoon and stuff and not getting anywhere. But then I slowly realized that what it was is that there's something stuck in her soup, and what that something is this odd, I gotta call it an angel creature. It doesn't really look too much like an angel, aside from the fact that it's humanoid and has wings, but aside from the point that it's humanoid and has wings, but it's the closest thing I can think of to describe it. But as soon as she pulls it out, she of course screams her head off. But then we switch to stop motion, which is something this movie does a lot. This movie is in live action for the most part, but every now and again we'll have a scene transition into stop motion, and it's really fun when it does happen. It's really well done as well. So as we switch into stop motion, she's still screaming, and the angel thing is alive. I thought it was a doll at first, but it is alive. So it sees her uvula coming down and wiggling because she's screaming, and it reaches in and rips it out of her mouth because it gets these hard eyes, those cartoony heart eyes when it sees it. So it's in love with it, which her uvula is in the shape of a heart, kind of like an upside down heart. So weird as it may sound, I guess it makes sense. I don't know. Anywho, he rips it out and he loses hold of it though, and it starts to fly away out the window, and he goes after it. Or it goes after it. Either way, the creature goes after it, and as it's flying away, we see the woman just collapse in her bowl of soup. That's funny. So he chases it throughout the town until it eventually lands on the inside of the house on like a little desk and gets like caught in the wood of the desk. And apparently this uvula is alive because it just kind of wiggles around like it's trying to escape, but it can't. But the angel thing catches it and is able to get hold of it now that it's caught, and it just eats it. It just straight up eats it. And then the next thing you know, suddenly it's either a crow or a raven. I can never tell the difference personally. I'm just going to call it a crow though. But it flies in, and it just eats the freaking angel thing. It starts chomping down on it. Its parts go flying here and there. Different limbs and other body parts go flying out from the crow's mouth. An eyeball comes out of the mouth, and the eyeball just has its own sentience, and it crawls into this like patchwork teddy bear that's like nearby. It has like a zipper mouth. It crawls into that. It crawls into the eye socket of that teddy bear and is now able to control it for some reason. And it gets these like Wolverine claws and kills the crow. And then we transition to a graveyard, and we see an egg fall from the bird's nest, and when it hatches, it becomes another one of those angel creatures. There's another crow that immediately eats it and then flies away, and it flies over the mountain. It poops right on this guy's head, right on his forehead. As that lands on his head, we get a transition back into live action, and this elderly man is the one that's been pooped on. He tosses a log at the crow and actually fucking hits it. He's a really good shot, honestly. He does this it's the second time in the movie later. It falls out of the sky and he gets Pochi, their dog, to go fetch it, rather. So this is where we meet the family, the Katakuris. So the man who was hit is the great-grandfather of the family. His name is Junpei. Then we have Yurie, which is the youngest girl in the group, in the family. She is the the only daughter, rather, of Shizue, and Shizue is the daughter of Masao, which is Junpei's son. And Masao is married to Terue, which is, of course, Shizue's mother. And Shizue also has a brother by the name of Masayuki, and those are our 5 members. So we have Masayuki, who is an ex-con, who's locked up before for stealing and other thievery, basically. So he's, seen as the family kind of sees him as like still a bad person, even though he's trying to like be a little better. Like he hasn't stolen in a while and everything, but they still are untrustworthy of him. Shizue, her whole thing is that she falls in love way too fast, and she's right now a single mother. Terue is just the wife to Masao. She doesn't have a lot of defined characteristics I can remember, but she does help him run the inn. She met him at work. They both used to work at a shoe sales place, and they met at work and fell in love. And when Masao got laid off, as well as Terue, I suppose, Masao had this great idea to go ahead and open this guest house, because somebody told him that they're building a brand new road up there on the mountain, and that the new road would bring through a lot of visitors, a lot of tourists, so they would need a place to stay. So he bought the guest house, got it all fixed up, and had his family work for him. So we pan over from Junpei after he's knocked right out of the sky. We watch Pochi go fetch it, and we meet Yurie right there. She's burying her goldfish at the moment. She even makes a little cross for it. It's really cute. And she's the one who she's the narrator of this movie, actually. It's basically her narrating from the future. So she's talking about these events as if they happened in the past. So she's basically telling us the story. We get to see a little scuffle between Masayuki and Shizue. They're repairing this little lover's swing, or whatever you want to call it, that sits out in the yard of the guest house. It's basically just a nice little swing that sits out, and you can have 2 people sit on it, and all that kind of stuff. It's kind of like one of those little outdoor swings you put on like your porch. almost except there's not a back seat, a back to the seat. Masao is very determined that people will show up eventually if they keep up the good work. You see, they haven't had a single guest yet. Right now, it's about to be the summertime, so he seems to think that, sometime soon we're going to have some tourists, because I assume it means because it's summer. Which makes the most sense, And you can tell he's kind of desperate for customers, but he even gets on the little couple swing like I mentioned. He tries to demonstrate, this is why people come here. Look, there's this great swing that you guys just fixed. It's so great. He tries to get on it and use it, and he fucking breaks it, and he goes flying over the fence, and he lands right in front of a few hikers that were happening to come up to the trail. It's those holy people I mentioned earlier, on their spiritual journey and whatnot. And we see now that an eclipse is starting to take place. For some reason, this really catches them off guard, spiritually, because two of them just faint extremely dramatically, and the other one just picks the other two up and it's like, okay, come on, we gotta get moving, because they got their journey to go on or whatever. I assume that maybe this eclipse has something to do with maybe why everything starts going bad. Maybe it's supposed to be a bad omen. Perhaps that's why they fainted. That would make the most sense. So then we get to see later that night the family gathering at supper time to eat. As they're watching some TV with their dinner, we get a blackout. And outside we see that it's pouring rain, absolutely pouring it down. Like it's raining sideways, if you catch my drift, Like a flood, basically. And the dog, Pochi, he starts to bark outside, bark at the door out. So they realize that somebody is outside. So they come out to see that there's a man who's bundled up in several coats, and he's got his umbrella broken, it's facing the wrong direction because of the wind. And it's so funny, they see this man struggling out here, and the Teruei just very cheerfully, hey, you want a room? She's just overwhelming positivity. That's what her character is, I guess. Basically, she's always so positive. So they get him in, they get him dried off, they give him a towel to wear for the time being. Jinpei offers him some clothing as well. They get him a guest room, and he heads upstairs. Now, one important note here, and this will come back later, is that the key they give him has this blue, little keychain thing. It's like a long stick, like a long plastic stick keychain. It's basically like their safety thing, kind of like how when you get a bathroom key at a gas station, they always have a little dongle keychain, whatever, attached to it, so that you can't steal it, easily. So anyways, he has that on it. That's important in the moment. But he goes upstairs, he tells one of them, I forget who was at the desk, but he tells them to bring up a beer to him at some point, so they do. So he goes upstairs, and we get a little brief musical number about him, and he's very depressed, it would seem. He's basically singing about how much he can't bear to go on, more or less. But his musical number is interrupted by Masayuki, who comes up and brings him the beer he had requested. And he says something very cryptic at this point, because he asks Masayuki, when he brings him beer, he asks him, if you knew that the world was going to end, what would you do tonight? And of course, Masayuki's like, what the fuck are you talking about, basically? And he's just he's like, never mind. He just takes the beer from her. And later, as he's drinking, we see later that night, he's working on something on the desk, he's carving something on the desk. Morning comes around, and they have breakfast ready for him, but he never shows up to breakfast. Never comes out of his room. So they all go upstairs to check on him, and his door is locked. So they can't get the door open by breaking it down. So they get their spare key and they go in, and they have a very dramatic entrance when they open the door. Also, they all just kind of pose in the door frame. We get another little song and dance number now as they all discover the man had taken that little blue plastic thing I told you that's attached to his key. What he was doing at the desk was he was shaving it down and carving it into a blade. which he then stuck in his neck. So, and it's funny that he even mentions, like, he has his own knife. Why did he do this to us, you know? But, after the little song and dance number, Masao decides that they can't call the police. Because if they call the police, they'll be on the news. And then if it's on the news, everyone will see that the first guest that they ever had died in their hotel. Died in their guest house. And that's going to be very bad publicity for them, because then no one wants to stay there, he thinks. So he tells them they must get rid of this body themselves. So he has them go get some plastic and some rope. So they do. They go ahead and they wrap up the body in plastic, a plastic tarp, and they tie it up, and they carry it off to the woods. Now we cut to Shizue. You see, Shizue had left for the day, along with her daughter Yurie. Two of them went off to this restaurant, which it might be the same restaurant from the opening. It's hard to tell. It's because the scene takes place outside, on the terrace and the balcony area of the restaurant, so it might be a different restaurant. It's hard to tell though. Anywho, she sings a song about longing for romance, because as I mentioned before, she's very quick to fall in love with people, so she's always looking for the next romance. So she sings about that, and as soon as their song ends, she sees a man walking by in a Navy uniform. And of course, as is her character, she instantly falls head over heels for him and can't take her eyes off of him. But she sits back down at her table with Yurie, who's leaving on Sunday, and she can't stop looking at him. Which he notices, of course, and after a moment, when she's not looking, he throws down a paper airplane at her. And it has, when she opens it up, it has a drawing of a woman. I think it's maybe supposed to be her, but it doesn't really look like her. So, there's a drawing of a woman on it, and he wrote in English, not Japanese, weirdly enough. He wrote in English, "I love you," on it. And then we get another musical number here, where it's the duet of Terue and this Navy man, singing about being in love with one another and longing for one's embrace kind of stuff. It's so ridiculous because they both just met each other, but they're both already apparently head over heels for each other. I've heard of love at first sight, but that's a little ridiculous. This is a little ridiculous. But after that song, they actually talk to each other. So that's the one thing they should have been doing in the first place, but whatever. So they talk to each other, and he introduces himself. He says that first he says that he's from the U.S. Navy. Then he's suddenly, I guess he knows that she probably doesn't understand how things work, because he explains. He says, "I'm from the U.S. Navy. More specifically, I'm from the British Royal Navy." I'm like, that's two different places. And it's important also that he does speak very broken Japanese, meaning that he'll mix in some English here and there while he's speaking the Japanese. He'll start off a sentence in English and finish it in Japanese. He'd say, "yesterday," and then start the Japanese part, or something along that lines, basically. But then at some point, he also does say that he's a British spy, so he's just all over the place, and it's totally not suspicious. It's not to Terue, not to Shizue. So he asks for her phone number, but she tells him, since I live in the mountain, my cell phone will not work. So she gives him the address to the guest house that they run, so he can come and drop by. Plus, it also has the house phone number on there, so he can call if he needs to, for the landline. And we also learn now that his name is Richard Sagawa. Claims that his mother was his mother is British, and that his father is Japanese, and that's how he knows Japanese so well. It's from his father. Back at the guest house, Masao has 2 consecutive nightmares about the man that they buried. What I mean by that is, when we go back to him the first time, he's having a nightmare. We don't know it yet, of course, but when he wakes up, because he sees a vision of the man outside, zombified, outside, waiting for him on the balcony, basically. And then he wakes up from that, and then he has another dream when he's supposedly woken up about the man again. And then finally wakes up for real in a cold sweat and whatnot. A few days pass by, and no one inquires about the man, No guests arrive for a few days. But finally, after a couple days or so, a famous sumo wrestler comes by. He brought along with him his young girlfriend. Now, I was a little concerned at first because I thought maybe she was underage, but it's never stated, and the family never says anything about it. And I was trying to figure out about the actress's age at this point because I couldn't figure out anything from the actual movie as far as her age. But the actress has not done a lot of films, so it's not really easy to dig up a lot of information about her as far as like what her age would have been at the time of this film. So it's unsure, but I believe she's of age, possibly, because the family didn't say anything about it. I feel like they would have mentioned something at some point if she was supposed to be depicted as not, as a minor, basically. So we're going to assume that hopefully she is of age, and this is not a case of pedophilia, because I do not want that on I don't want to think about that. I would rather it not be that case, especially for a scene that's coming up sooner or later. So, but they go and they get a room, but meanwhile, while they're in their room, also as soon as they get in the room, they're already like all over each other, like ready to get it on. Basically, they keep their clothes on for a while, thankfully, but it doesn't say that way. Let's put it that way. Anyways, Masao talks with Teruei, his wife, that he thinks Masayuki might have been behind the death of the man, because one, Masayuki was the last person to see him, and two, the man's wallet is missing. And like I mentioned earlier, Masayuki went to jail before for stealing, so he thinks that he's up to his old tricks again of, being a thief, and that he killed him for the wallets, basically. Afterwards, the phone starts to ring, the landline starts to ring, and it's Richard on the line. He's calling Shizue, telling her, and tells her to know the lie. See, he tells her that he's flying over Iraq. I'm pretty sure the Navy would not do. Pretty sure they would sail, but what do I know? Anywho, he tells her that, and we see a brief glimpse where he's back at his apartment or home or whatever it is, and you can see he's just sitting in the living room in his underwear while he plays this tape of war sounds or whatever. So he just has the radio playing, and it's just all these sounds of people screaming and gunfire and stuff. But she buys it because of course she does, because she's all head over heels in love and blind to everything. But so the next day, you see that the couple are both dead. You see, that night, the two of them were making love, and the sumo wrestler guy was on top. And he had a heart attack during the act, and he collapsed on top of the girl. So, heart attack kills him, and then she dies under his weight, being smothered by him, basically. And Masao says, well, we can't risk the police again. We have to bury these guys as well. We'll have to lower him out the window because he's so big and all that. But can't risk the bad publicity, But then, wouldn't you know, as luck would have it, there's actually a policeman already here. See, they hear a knock at the door. It's an officer. I don't remember his name, but it's not super important. Either way, so they throw a sheet over the bodies real quick, just for a second, to hide them. And they all go downstairs. The police officer had some kind of form to fill out. It seemed like a census report based on the questions that Shizue was filling out. Anywho, he also leaves them with a wanted poster that has several people on it. And he leaves it on the table, and it rolls up, but we see very briefly a glimpse of it, and Richard is on that wanted poster. So if he wasn't sus enough, there's even more reason. But after they fill out the form and hand it back to him, policemen find the ruse, and once he's good enough distance away, they start to go ahead and get back to disposing of the bodies. They lower the sumo wrestler out of the window, get the girl out the door and everything, go to the forest once again, bury them, just like the last man. They're on their way back now to the guest house, and they see a bunch of young people waiting at the door. They see them coming up the hill, coming down the mountain with the gear and stuff, and they ask them, the young people do. Young guy will ask them for some food, basically, because they're all starving. They want to eat, basically. So they just came there just for the food, not to be hotel guests, you know. So they all happily serve them some cake, and Maso watches over his family as the guests are getting their cake, and some of the family members are actually sitting down and eating with the guests as well. So he has a nice, happy look on his face. And then we get a flashback sequence for when he first bought the property. And this flashback is also a musical number, because of course it is. This musical number is all about how they want this new inn to bring them the happiness that they so much desire. You see their whole idea with this was that, since this would bring them a lot of extra money, this would also bring them their happiness, they hope. So after the musical number, we snap back to present time, and Maso gets a call from the construction company, and they tell him that, we're finally starting to work on the road. And he's like, thank God, I've been praying that you guys would start on that soon. And they tell him, though, that while they are working on the road, they need to dig up the lake area behind his guest house. And if you haven't guessed why that's a bad thing, it's because that's where they've been burying the bodies. So Maso is now panicked because he tells Terue what he was told on the phone. So she tells him that he just needs to calm down and that we will move the bodies. Later on, you get to see Richard coming. He's stumbling around the lake area on his way to the guest house. He hits the door and he's all covered in dirt and, limping and whatnot. I'm pretty sure he just, injured himself in the forest just to, make it look like he was injured because, he had the whole Iraq lie. But, yeah. He comes to the door and Shizue, of course, is really happy to see him. She offers him some food and some drink and everything. And he does this really fucking weird and dramatic thing where he gets up on the stairwell and gets, to the little, the landing platform on the stairwell. He gets up and he poses all dramatically and he says, "I want to eat you," and he points at her. And I think that was supposed to be a euphemism, he's saying he wants to, but I don't know, this felt really weird. But she tells him, no thanks, or she doesn't actually tell him anything, she faints, forgot, sorry. So she just faints, yeah. Which is a valid response, I suppose, if a man just comes up and says he wants to eat you. I guess that's probably pretty valid. But, he ignores that, anyways, and just goes upstairs into one of the guest rooms. He gets on the bed, and he's having some stomach issues or something. He's, grabbing at his stomach, and you can hear, the, grumbling noises in there and stuff. He's having gas issues, it seems like. And while he's on the bed, though, he sees, in between the wall and the bed, the wallet. The missing wallet from the man. So he takes the money out of it first, to see how much the money is in there, and there's only 1,000 yen I saw, so it means it basically only had $10 in there. It's about equal to $10 USD. So, but he takes the wallet with him too, it seems like, later, so. But later that night, Shizue is, recovered from her fainting spell earlier. And she's sitting on the little swing outside. So Richard goes to join her and they have a little talk. Meanwhile, Maso and Terue have a little musical number together, and they do this little fantasy sequence where it's a karaoke scene. So you can see the lyrics displayed on screen like you would at karaoke. It's really funny. And they did because the scene is not in their house at all. It's just they just suddenly transition to a nightclub stage or whatever it is. And they're singing their song and stuff. But this song is all about how they met for the first time and their love for each other and whatnot. After that number, we see Richard and Shizue go on a walk together. They go for a walk through the woods, and they end up at this little cliff area where there's a bunch of garbage. I don't know if it's supposed to be a dump or if it's just, a dump not by choice, but by people just, being assholes and throwing shit around. And, throwing shit where it's not supposed to go. Anywho, they take a seat on the bench that's there. It's a broken, busted up Coca-Cola bench. Anywho, And Richard tries to tell yet another lie and says that he's his Queen Elizabeth's nephew now. That his mother, who was British, like we mentioned earlier, is Queen Elizabeth's sister. And that he grew up in the castle, supposedly he's British royalty now. We also see a brief look where we can see that Jinpei, the great-grandpa, is watching on from a distance. He's got a big log in his hand as well, like a club, basically. And he's watching because he doesn't trust Richard, and rightfully so. But Richard starts to talk about how he really wants to go back to England, but he doesn't have the money for it. So now you can see the scam here, which is probably why he's on that wanted poster. But he has a little musical number, basically, where he asks Shizue for the money to go back to England so he can go see his family and stuff. But Jinpei interrupts this musical number, then sneaks up on him and smacks him over the head with the log that he had. It doesn't knock him out, but it does stun him briefly, and then the two of them start to fight. During this fight, we see that Richard has stolen a couple things. We see the wallet from earlier from the first guest, and he also drops the ashtray from the hotel room, in the guest room. He was trying to steal from them as well as, trying to scam their daughter out of money. So, yeah, not good luck. So the two of them are fighting, and they end up tumbling down off the cliff. And as they tumble, we switch once again into claymation. And then we get them both hanging off the mountain. Richard found some vines, and Jinpei got a hold of a tree branch that's stuck in the side of the mountain. Very Wile E. Coyote of him. But Richard breaks off the stick and tries to make Jinpei fall the rest of the way. Jinpei is able to grab the vines that Richard's hanging from, because there's some below him. So he's able to reach that. But Richard tries to cut the vines off his little knife, buck knife. He tries to start carving the vines and cutting them off. But before he can do that, Shizue grabs a large rock and drops it on Richard's head, knocking him out and knocking him off of the vines. So he falls into the ravine below to the river and gets swept away by the current. So Shizue helps Jinpei get back up, and we go back into real life from the map. Later that day, Shizue and Teruo are having a talk on the stairs, more or less about love lives. And Richard, somehow, still alive, stumbles into the door, stumbles in through the door. He's like half dead, he's badly wounded, he's covered in dirt and other things, and limping really badly, this time for real, for sure. And he collapses on the floor on his back. Before he can collapse, I almost forgot. He grabs the landline and he dials the number, but I don't know if anyone actually picks up. But he starts apologizing to multiple women in his life about how he was a bad man. And he finally collapses on the floor and croaks. Jinpei goes over and searches his body because he didn't trust him, and he finds the wallet and ashtray that he stole, and then he also looks inside the Navy uniform. He's still wearing his uniform. And we see inside, in the coat's left side, there was a patch sewn in that says and such as costume rental company. So, yeah, as we suspected, as was painfully obvious, he is of course a con man, never served in any kind of military service, stolen valor, the man, basically. They take him out, they bury him as well. Later that night, after coming back from the burial, they're all inside and they hear a flute out of nowhere start to play off key. It's funny, Maso has a moment, he's like, what'll it be this time? What's waiting for us this time, basically? And they open the door. It's a family of four. A man, a woman, and their two children, a very young boy, and a slightly older girl. The boy is sick, he has a little cough. They go ahead and get a room, just one room for all four of them also. And the mom kind of cryptically asks for a cord, so of course they think, oh lord, we're gonna have another one of these. They go upstairs, the family goes upstairs, the guest family that is, goes upstairs and gets in their room. And Maso is pretty much preparing for the worst. He knows there's, we've had 4 deaths now with Richard at this guest house, so it wouldn't be too far-fetched to have them die as well. The next day, Junpei and Masayuki are digging around looking for the bodies that they had buried so they can move them. But they're digging a hole that is empty, so they're no luck so far. But they hear some people call out to them as they're digging, and it's the family that was staying in the guest house. They're all fine, they're all alive. It turns out the cord that they asked for was just to make a belt for the young boy, so he could keep his pants up and all that, And of course they're like, what's with the hole? And they're like, oh, it's for the garbage, totally, They get away, they walk away, the family does, and Junpei and Masayuki are ready to get back to the hole. And some random ass man just comes by and falls in the hole and knocks himself out. He is alive, though. That is important. He is alive. But for some reason, Junpei goes ahead and he starts trying to bury the man. And after he throws the first clump of dirt, at first I thought he was like, oh, he's just checking for life by throwing the dirt at him, right? And the man starts to breathe. But Junpei just keeps piling more dirt on him and starts to bury him. But you don't get to see if he ever finished burying him, but he is not that great later, so I'm assuming not. So then we get to see Yurie and Boshi. They're on a walk in the woods, and while in the woods, she sees that there was a little small earthquake that happened earlier on, and it would seem that shook loose the bodies. She comes upon all four of the bodies, rotting and decaying in the woods. The family comes by, and having seen this, they get another musical number with the whole family that it's basically about trying to stay positive and, they gotta look at the bright side of things. They've had all these deaths. And while having this musical number, the corpses start to come to life and be zombies and also sing about the same song. It's so ridiculous just seeing the zombies come out of nowhere. Especially because of the fact that after the musical number ends, there were no zombies. They were just there for the musical number. They just popped in, just for a moment. They weren't ever real, it seems. And then we have another quake once again after the musical number is over. So the stranger from earlier, it would seem, did not get buried, as he wakes up in the guest room of the guest house. But he's all naked. Well, he has his underwear, but other than that, he's naked. But his clothes are in the room with him, so he gets dressed, and he starts to kind of panic. He's like, what the hell's going on here? And he gets out of the house, and he sees the family, the Katakuris, coming down the trail. You see, they had just finished burying the bodies, and now they're heading back to their home. But as soon as he sees them, he just jumps back through their window, and they're surprisingly unfazed by this, it seems. But anyways, they get back down to their home and they see that the police are waiting for them, but they're waiting across the road from them. So out walks the police officer from earlier who gave them the census report or whatever it was, and two detectives. And of course they think, their first thought is, oh my god, they discovered the bodies. So they think that they're onto them. So then we have a little musical number here between Masayuki, Masao, and Junpei, who are all basically trying to fight over who should take the blame for the situation so that the whole family doesn't get in trouble. Masayuki's whole point is that he's been to jail before, so it won't be too much of a bad spot in his record. And Masao wants to do it because the fact that he's the family patriarch, so he wants to take the bullet, show that he supports his family. And Junpei wants to take the blame because he's too old and he basically has lived his life long enough and he wants this to be his final sacrifice for his family, more or less. But after the musical number, which was apparently all in their heads, it would seem, because no one really reacts to them doing the singing afterwards, which I feel like a lot of this musical is probably in their heads, more or less, but it's funny. But regardless of that, the police are approaching, of course, once again, because it's basically time stop almost. So they're approaching, and Junpei walks up and he tries to, he puts his hands out, ready for handcuffs, as if to, confess, but they just kind of walk past him, and they continue until they get to the front door. They ask Masao now if he's had any odd guests, because it turns out the reason they're actually there is because some man murdered his girlfriend. Or rather, they found the dead girlfriend, and they've assumed that it is this man, who was apparently her lover or her fiancé or something like that. So, as it would turn out, that stranger is the suspect. We see in the inside of the house that Terue had gone inside, and she's now being held at knife point by the killer. He bursts out of the house with her at knife point, and of course everyone's yelling, screaming, and everything. But Maso is able to talk him down into releasing Terue, at least. But after he gets her back, the man tries to charge him with the knife. And right on time though, before he can get to him, Masayuki steps in and takes the blade. Like, he gets stabbed instead, in other words. This provides enough of a distraction for the police field to tackle the stranger, and they get him down and start to cuff him and stuff. But then we see, of course, Masayuki's collapsed as well, and family huddles around him, and we have a little small musical number about him basically just saying goodbye to his family and apologizing for being such a, piece of shit, basically. But then it just turns out that he was just grazed by the blade, because you can see he's got blood all over his hands from the wound, where he was touching the wound. But when we go back to one of the members, I think Maso, if I remember correctly, checks the wound, and it's just a little tiny cut, a very surface level cut. So he's like, hey, it's just a graze. As soon as he finds out it's a graze, as soon as Masayuki finds out it's a graze, he just springs to life and is just oh yeah, I'm better now. It's magically all better. It's power of suggestion, I suppose, right? But we can't celebrate for too long, because not long after he gets up, another quake happens. And it turns out it's not really a quake that's been happening, it's the volcano. The mountain is actually a volcano, and it's erupting. And now we transition back into claymation once more. And through claymation, we're shown there's a big avalanche happening from the eruption of the snow. So it's all coming down the mountain towards their home. So they all join hands, police and the stranger included, and they form a circle around the home. And they basically brace for impact. And as the avalanche approaches, they all start to kind of lift up the house, and it spins around on top of them and stuff while the avalanche is coming down on them, but not on the house. It's very strange. Once again, we're still in stop motion, claymation style as well. But for some of that, we fade to black, and we get, when the picture comes back, basically, we see a POV shot from Masao's point of view, and all the family surrounding him, waking him up, basically. And he gets up, and we get to see that everything is pretty much fine. There's some destruction from coming down from the mountain and everything, but the guest home is completely fine. Not a scratch on it. You can see there's some dirt and other debris and whatnot surrounding the grounds of it, but other than that, it's completely fine. And they look around, and there's just large green field, and there's African wildlife for some reason. There's elephants and zebra and giraffe and whatnot just around. It's very badly photoshopped into the background. But they see all that, and they start the final musical number, how they're finally all happy and whatnot. And so during the musical number, we also see the policeman and the stranger are buried in some rubble. Just their heads and their hands are poking out. You can see that the stranger is still handcuffed, and they're just kind of bopping along with the musical number. It's fucking fun. But yeah, then we get a little final narration from Yurie's future self, talking about that they would lose great grandpa Jinpei later the next year, and then Jinpei gets enveloped with light and just flies away. And the roll credits is quite the ending. I'm very confused about what exactly happened at the end, where they're all surrounded by the green field and everything. My best guess
So since we do know that they're alive because we get the future Yuries talk to us, so that bumps out the idea that it could be like an afterlife. But my best guess is that the avalanche actually knocked them down the mountain into another area. That's my best guess, but it's so strange. But regardless of all that, this was a very fun, ridiculous film. I definitely recommend it, especially if you like Japanese kind of content, because you know how, if you ever watch Japanese commercials, it's kind of like watching one of those for a nice hour and a half or so, because it's just some moments of just so much insanity and strangeness that you almost can't believe it be, real. Especially that opening bit. That bit was fucking crazy. But all in all, very nice film. Good music. Good visuals as well, with the claymation style that would come around every now and again. The claymation is a little unsettling, because it can be a little uncanny looking. It's very grotesque kind of looking, but it is still fun to look at. Hilarious as well. So I highly recommend this one. Once again, it's called Happiness of the Katakuris on Tubi as well. And this is the final episode for the No Way November stuff. I'll still be covering some bad movies and some things like that, but right now our focus will be on Christmas stuff. Now this will be mostly it's going to be obscure and cult classic kind of Christmas movies. So we're looking at. Up next on the docket is Alfette Saves Christmas. I originally was going to be doing Santa Claus Conquers the Martians, but that turned out to be extremely boring to watch. I tried to watch it with my movie group, and we turned it off after about 40 to 50 minutes of watching it. It was just so painstakingly boring. It's a lot of stock footage, and it's just a lot of nothing happens. In fact, it took them a good 40 minutes to actually kidnap Santa Claus in a 70-minute movie about kidnapping Santa Claus. So yeah, that's just bad pacing right there. Fun and cheesy effects and all that kind of stuff, but other than that, it was really boring. But we got, like I said, I got a suggestion for another movie from my friend DL. So she told me about this movie called Alfette Saves Christmas, so we're going to be looking at that next week. It's on Tubi, of course, if you want to check it out beforehand. It's about basically the mafia kidnapping Santa Claus and one of his elves having to save him. So it sounds like a fun ride for sure. So I'll be back with that next time. Until then, be sure to follow me on Spotify here for more content. Be sure to follow me on Twitter for updates and release schedules. That's at BFE Podcasts on Twitter. If you have suggestions for movies, you can send it to me at Gmail. It is broadcastsfromelsewhere@gmail.com. And other than that, thank you so much for listening. Hope you have a great day. Really appreciate you guys listening to this podcast. So that's all I've got for you today. This is Enigma, signing up.